An immigrant shared his lunch with a hungry man who turned out to be the mayor of the town. On a day when hope seemed as distant as the homeland he'd left behind, Mateo Santos sat alone on a park bench, his weathered hands cradling a simple paper bag containing the only meal he could afford that day. A homemade sandwich of crusty bread and the last of his chorizo, wrapped carefully in wax paper that crinkled with each nervous adjustment of his fingers. 3 months in America, 3 months of rejection slips, sympathetic head shakes, and the slow, steady depletion of the savings he'd brought with him from Ecuador. The early autumn air carried a chill that seemed to seep through his thin jacket, a reminder that winter was coming and his situation was growing more desperate by the day. Mateo's gaze drifted across Jefferson Park, taking in the comfortable lives unfolding around him. Mothers pushing strollers, business people hurrying through lunch breaks, teenagers lounging carelessly on the grass. Millwood had seemed like the perfect small American town when he'd researched places to begin his new life. Affordable, growing, with opportunities for someone willing to work hard. Yet here he sat, invisible, his architect's degree from Quito, worthless without the right certifications, his broken English seemingly more of a barrier with each passing interview. He unwrapped his sandwich slowly, savoring the familiar scent of paprika and garlic that reminded him of Sunday afternoons in his mother's kitchen. One half today, he decided, the other half for tomorrow. This was what survival had become. Careful rationing, endless calculations, the constant mathematics of desperation. Beautiful day, isn't it? Mateo startled at the voice beside him. A man had settled at the opposite end of the bench, middle-aged with silver threading through dark hair and a face lined with what might have been either worry or laughter. His clothes were oddly mismatched, expensive leather shoes paired with a rumpled suit that had seen better days. No briefcase, just a man staring out at the park with tired eyes. Yes, Mateo answered carefully, his accent thick around the simple word. Beautiful. The man smiled but didn't turn to look at him. Instead, he continued gazing across the park, shoulders slumped slightly. Sometimes I come here just to remember why I do what I do. To see actual people living their lives instead of statistics on a budget report. Mateo nodded politely, though he understood perhaps half of what the man had said. He took a small bite of his sandwich, trying to eat slowly to make it last. A low, unmistakable sound broke the momentary silence between them. The rumble of the stranger's empty stomach. The man patted his midsection with an embarrassed laugh. Forgot my wallet today. Happens more than I'd like to admit. The mind gets so full of problems to solve that basic things just slip away. Something in the man's voice, a hollow note beneath the self-deprecation, resonated with Mateo. Without overthinking, he tore his sandwich in half and extended the untouched portion across the bench. Please. Tari, take. The stranger's eyebrows rose in surprise. Oh, I couldn't possibly. Please. Mateo insisted, the word firm despite his limited vocabulary. I know hungry. For a moment, the man simply stared at the offered food, something complicated passing across his features. Then with a grateful nod, he accepted. Thank you. That's very kind. They ate in companionable silence, two strangers sharing a bench in a simple meal as the afternoon sun filtered through autumn leaves. When the man finished his half, he brushed crumbs from his rumpled suit and turned to Mateo with curious eyes. I'm Robert, he said, extending his hand. Robert Kensington. Mateo Santos. Their handshake was brief but firm. You're new to Millwood, Robert observed. Not a question. Mateo nodded. 3 months. From Ecuador. And how are you finding our little town? The question hung between them, loaded with potential answers. Mateo could have offered platitudes, could have said what he thought the man wanted to hear. Instead, something in Robert's attentive gaze prompted honesty. Barmum. Beautiful town, but difficult too. He searched for the right words, his fingers unconsciously mimicking the shape of buildings. To belong. To find work. Robert nodded slowly. What kind of work are you looking for? I am architect. In Ecuador. Mateo pointed to himself, then gestured at the ground. Here, I try anything. Construction. Restaurant. Store. But always they say no. An architect? Robert's expression shifted, interest kindling in his eyes. That's quite a coincidence. This town has some ambitious development plans in the works. Mateo smiled politely, accustomed to such vague encouragements that ultimately led nowhere. He began rewrapping the remaining quarter of his sandwich, carefully folding the wax paper. Do you have a portfolio? Examples of your work? Robert asked. Yes. At apartment, Mateo hesitated, then added with a hint of pride, I designed community center in Quito. Small museum also. Robert pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to Mateo. Come to this address tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock. Bring your portfolio. Mateo accepted the card, turning it over in his hands. His eyes widened as he read the embossed lettering. Robert Kensington, Mayor, Town of Millwood. You are... Mateo looked up, disbelief plain on his face. Robert smiled, standing and straightening his rumpled suit. Just a man who forgot his wallet today, and who won't forget your kindness. He paused, his voice softening. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen over the simplest of shared meals, don't they? As Robert walked away, Mateo remained frozen on the bench, the business card clutched between trembling fingers, wondering if hunger had finally made him hallucinate. He had just shared his meager lunch with the mayor of Millwood. Morning arrived with a sky the color of indecision, neither fully bright nor threatening rain. Mateo stood outside the imposing brick building that housed Millwood's municipal offices, his portfolio case clutched tightly in sweating hands. He had spent half the night organizing his work, selecting his best designs, rehearsing explanations in his halting English. The other half he'd spent convincing himself this wasn't some elaborate prank or misunderstanding. The municipal building's glass doors reflected his image as he approached. A lean man with anxious eyes wearing his only good shirt, freshly ironed but unmistakably worn at the collar. Not for the first time since arriving in America, Mateo felt the phantom weight of his father's hand on his shoulder, heard the echo of his final advice. Stand tall. You are a Santos. Your worth is not in your possessions, but in what you carry inside. Mateo straightened his shoulders and pulled open the heavy door. The reception area buzzed with morning activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, people moving with purpose between offices. A young woman at the front desk looked up as he approached. Good morning. How can I help you? Mateo placed Robert's business card on the counter. I have appointment with Mayor Kensington. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Your name, sir? Mateo Santos. She checked a computer screen, surprise registering on her face. Yes, Mr. Santos. The mayor left specific instructions for your arrival. She stood, gesturing toward a hallway. Please follow me. Each step down the corridor felt unreal. Municipal awards and framed photographs lined the walls. Ribbon cuttings, groundbreakings, community celebrations. In several, Mateo recognized Robert, looking more polished than he had on the park bench, but with the same thoughtful eyes. The assistant knocked on a heavy wooden door at the end of the hallway. Mr. Santos is here, sir. Send him in, Jennifer, and hold my calls for the next hour. Robert Kensington's office was unexpectedly modest. Practical furniture, stacks of documents, large windows overlooking the town square. The mayor himself rose from behind his desk, today properly attired in a crisp blue suit, extending his hand in welcome. Mr. Santos, thank you for coming. Sopranos, thank you for invitation. Mateo replied, the formal situation making his English even more hesitant than usual. Robert gestured to a conference table in the corner of the office, where an older man with silver hair and architect's glasses was already seated. This is Howard Greeley, our city planner. Howard, this is Mateo Santos, the architect I mentioned. Howard nodded, his expression professionally neutral as he extended his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Mr. Santos. Please sit, Robert said, taking a seat across from them. I hope you don't mind, but I've asked Howard to join us. When you mentioned your background yesterday, I immediately thought of our community center project. Mateo carefully placed his portfolio on the table, fingers lingering on its worn edges. Community center? Robert nodded, leaning forward with animated hands. Millwood received a federal grant to build a multicultural community center. Construction begins next spring, but we've hit a roadblock with the design. The architects we've consulted so far haven't quite captured what we're looking for. Howard cleared his throat. We need something that honors the diverse backgrounds of our growing immigrant population while still feeling intrinsically American. His tone carried a hint of skepticism, though whether directed at the project or at Mateo wasn't clear. May I? Robert gestured to Mateo's portfolio. Mateo nodded, his heartbeat quickening as the mayor opened the case and began carefully examining the drawings and photographs inside. Howard leaned closer, his professional curiosity overcoming his initial reserve. This community center in Quito, Robert said, pointing to a series of renderings. Tell us about it. For a moment, Mateo's mind went blank, the English words evaporating under pressure. Then he remembered his professor's advice from university. When words fail, let your work speak. He pulled out the central blueprint of the Quito project and laid it flat on the table. His fingers traced the lines he had drawn 3 years earlier, and suddenly the words came, halting at first, then flowing more confidently as he explained how he had designed the space to bring together traditional Ecuadorian architectural elements with modern functionality. Here, see? The courtyard connects all spaces. In my country, the plaza, how you say, it is the heart, where community happens. Not just a building for programs, but a place for belonging. As he spoke, Mateo's hands moved expressively, sketching invisible additions in the air above his plans. For those moments, he forgot his precarious situation, forgot the dwindling dollars in his bank account, forgot the strange circumstances that had led him to this office. He was simply an architect again, sharing his passion for creating spaces that shaped human experience. When he finally looked up, both men were watching him intently. Howard's professional mask had slipped, revealing genuine interest. Robert was smiling, a look of vindication in his eyes. "This is exactly the perspective we've been missing," Robert said quietly. "Someone who understands both worlds, who knows what it means to create a space where cultures can meet as equals." Howard nodded slowly. "Your technical skills are evident, Mr. Santos. But I'm curious, how would you approach an American project? Our building codes and regulations are quite different." It was a fair question, one Mateo had anticipated. He withdrew another folder from his case, opening it to reveal studies and sketches he'd created during sleepless nights in his small apartment. "Since coming to Millwood, I study American architecture. Local buildings. I learn your codes little by little." He pushed forward a conceptual drawing of a modern structure that nonetheless echoed the proportions of Millwood's historic downtown. "This is just for keep your practice, to understand your town better." Howard's eyebrows rose as he examined the drawings. "These are impressive, especially for someone working without local resources." He glanced at Robert. "There's real talent here." Robert nodded, then fixed Mateo with a direct gaze. "Mr. Santos, I'll be frank. We need fresh ideas for this community center, and your background gives you a unique perspective. I'd like to offer you a 6-month contract as a design consultant on the project, working directly with Howard and his team." The words hung in the air like impossible birds. Mateo stared, certain he had misunderstood. "You want me? To design? To contribute to the design team, yes. The pay isn't extraordinary, but it's fair, and it would give you American work experience and professional connections." Robert leaned forward, his voice sincere. "This is not charity, Mr. Santos. This is recognition of skill and perspective we need." Howard nodded in agreement. "If your certification paperwork is in process, we can work with that for a consulting position." Mateo's hands trembled slightly as he gathered his portfolio materials. "Why?" he asked finally, looking up at Robert. "Why you do this? Because of sandwich?" Robert's smile faded into something more solemn. "Not because of the sandwich, Mr. Santos. Because of what the sandwich revealed." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Yesterday, I was having one of the worst days of my tenure as mayor. Budget crises. Political opponents. A morning of people wanting things from me, not a single person offering anything in return. I went to the park to clear my head, and there you were, a man with almost nothing, sharing what little you had without hesitation." Robert shook his head slightly, as if still processing the memory. "In that moment, you reminded me of something essential I'd lost sight of, that a community isn't built on budgets and policies. It's built on the connections between people who care about each other, even strangers." He gestured toward the window, to the town beyond. "Millwood needs more of that spirit, not less, and our community center should be designed by someone who embodies it." Something warm and unfamiliar expanded in Mateo's chest. Not quite hope, but perhaps its precursor. Recognition. The sensation of being truly seen for the first time since he'd left his homeland. "I accept," he said simply, the words carrying the weight of new beginnings. Robert smiled, extending his hand. "Welcome to the team, Mr. Santos." Winter descended on Millwood with theatrical flair. First, a gentle dusting of snow that transformed the town into a scene from a Christmas card, then a series of storms that tested the resolve of even longtime residents. For Mateo, the harsh weather was yet another adjustment in a season already filled with changes. The consulting position with the community center project had transformed his daily existence. Instead of sitting alone in the park or walking miles to save bus fare, he now spent his days in a small but functional office adjacent to the city planning department, his drawing table positioned near a window that overlooked the snow-covered town square. Howard Greeley, initially reserved, had become a demanding but fair mentor, challenging Mateo's ideas while respecting his perspective. If we're going to bend regulations, he'd say with dry humor, we'd better have damn good reasons. And together they found those reasons, integrating Mateo's concepts of communal space with the practical requirements of American civic architecture. Yet despite these professional victories, loneliness shadowed Mateo's evenings. He had moved to a slightly better apartment, one with reliable heat, but returned each night to empty rooms and FaceTime conversations with family that only deepened his awareness of the distance separating him from everything familiar. December arrived, bringing with it Millwood's annual Winter Festival, a weekend of community celebrations culminating in the lighting of an enormous Christmas tree in the town square. Posters announcing the event papered the municipal building for weeks beforehand, and Howard mentioned offhandedly that attendance was practically mandatory for anyone working for the town. So on the first Friday evening of December, Mateo found himself standing awkwardly at the edge of the festival, watching families and friends gather in cheerful groups around fire pits and food stalls. Holiday music drifted from speakers mounted on lampposts, and children darted through the crowd, their laughter visible as puffs of vapor in the cold air. Mateo pulled his coat tighter, a recent purchase from a thrift store that was warmer than it was fashionable. He had come as Howard suggested, but now felt acutely out of place. This was not his holiday, not his tradition, not his community, not really despite the paycheck that now arrived every 2 weeks with the town seal embossed at the top. Mr. Santos, you made it. Robert Kensington appeared beside him, accompanied by a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked dark hair. The mayor wore a festive red scarf and carried 2 cups of steaming liquid. Mayor Kensington. Mateo nodded formally. Yes, Mr. Greeley say it is important event. Robert, please. We're not in the office now. He handed one of the cups to Mateo. Hot cider. Best in the county, though don't tell that to our neighbors in Eastbrook. He gestured to the woman beside him. This is my wife, Elena. It's wonderful to finally meet you, Mr. Santos, she said, her smile genuine. Robert has told me so much about your work on the community center. Mateo accepted the cider with a murmured thank you, surprised by the gesture and the informal introduction. Please call me Mateo. Are you enjoying the festival? Elena asked. Mateo hesitated, caught between politeness and honesty. Something in Elena's attentive gaze encouraged the latter. It is very beautiful, but I feel, he searched for the right word, outside, watching through window. Elena nodded, understanding, softening her features. Holidays away from home are the hardest. When I first moved to the States from Guatemala, Christmas nearly broke my heart. Everything was different. The food, the music, even the timing of celebrations. Mateo stared at her in surprise. You are from Guatemala? Born and raised in Antigua, she confirmed. Came here for college 30 years ago and never left. Though there are still days when I miss home so much it feels like hunger. The simple acknowledgement of this shared experience, the invisible ache that accompanied migration, loosened something tight in Mateo's chest. He took a sip of the cider, its warmth traveling through him like a memory of comfort. Robert, watching this exchange with thoughtful eyes, placed a hand on Mateo's shoulder. Come with us. There are people you should meet. Before Mateo could protest, he found himself being guided through the festival, introduced to town council members, local business owners, and residents. Robert presented him not as an immigrant or a temporary consultant, but as the architect bringing fresh vision to our community center project. With each introduction, the invisible barrier Mateo had felt between himself and Millwood seemed to thin slightly. People asked questions about his designs, about Ecuador, about his impressions of their town. Some conversations remained superficial, limited by language barriers or cultural differences, but others opened unexpected doors. My daughter's studying architecture at State College, mentioned Frank Chen, who owned the hardware store downtown. She'd love to see your work sometime. We should talk about the lighting design for the center, said Anita Kaminsky, an electrical engineer whose Polish accent was still detectable after decades in America. I have some ideas about energy efficiency you might find interesting. By the time they reached the central square, where the unlit Christmas tree towered, Mateo's initial discomfort had transformed into something more complex. Not quite belonging, but perhaps its beginning. The crowd gathered for the lighting ceremony, families pressing close together against the cold. Mayor Kensington was called to the small stage set up beside the tree. As Robert excused himself, Elena leaned closer to Mateo. Stay with me. The view is better from here. Robert approached the microphone, his breath visible in the frosty air as he addressed the assembled crowd. He spoke about community traditions, about the year's challenges and triumphs, about the meaning of light in the darkest season. Standard mayoral fare, delivered with sincere warmth. Then his tone shifted slightly. This year, Millwood has welcomed new neighbors from across the country and around the world. Our community grows richer with each new perspective, each new story that becomes part of our shared history. His gaze found Mateo in the crowd. Sometimes it takes a newcomer's eyes to help us see our own community more clearly. And sometimes it takes a simple act of generosity to remind us what truly matters. Mateo felt heat rise to his face, aware that several nearby festival goers had turned to look at him. Elena squeezed his arm gently. So this year, Robert continued, as we light our tree, I invite us all to consider how we might make Millwood not just a place on a map, but a true home for everyone who lives here. A countdown began, voices rising in unison. 10, 9, 8, until the massive tree burst into light, thousands of tiny bulbs illuminating the darkness as the crowd cheered. In that moment of collective joy, Mateo felt a curious sensation. The ghost of Ecuador still present in his heart, but alongside it, the first tentative roots of connection to this snow-covered American town. Later, as the crowd dispersed toward various festival attractions, Robert rejoined them, his face flushed from the cold and the energy of public speaking. What did you think? He asked Mateo. Beautiful tree, Mateo replied honestly. Beautiful words also. Robert smiled. I have a favor to ask. We host a small dinner at our home on the last night of the festival. Nothing formal, just friends, good food, conversation. Would you join us this Sunday? The invitation caught Mateo off guard. Me? At your home? Yes, you, Elena confirmed warmly. Around 6 o'clock? I'm making both American and Guatemalan dishes. Perhaps you could tell me if any are close to Ecuadorian cuisine. The generosity of the invitation, its casual assumption of Mateo's place in their circle, momentarily robbed him of words. He nodded, managing a quiet, "Thank you. I would be honored." As they parted ways for the evening, Mateo's steps felt lighter despite the cold. The festival lights reflected in shop windows and on patches of ice, transforming the familiar streets of his daily commute into something magical and new. For the first time since arriving in Millwood, he walked through town not as a desperate outsider, but as someone with a name, a role, connections beginning to form. The winter night embraced him, cold but no longer hostile. Above, stars punctured the darkness with ancient light that had traveled unimaginable distances to reach this small American town. Not so different, perhaps, from his own journey. Sunday evening arrived with another light snowfall that dusted Millwood like powdered sugar. Mateo stood on the porch of the Kensington's Victorian home, a bottle of wine in one hand, stretching his budget but the only appropriate gift he could think of, and a small, carefully wrapped package in the other. Before he could knock, the door swung open, releasing a wave of warmth, conversation, and the mingled aromas of unfamiliar spices. Elena welcomed him with a quick embrace that startled him with its easy affection. "Mateo! Come in from the cold. Let me take your coat." The Kensington's home was larger than Mateo had expected, but furnished with comfortable, well-worn pieces rather than ostentatious displays of wealth. Family photographs crowded bookshelves, children's artwork hung framed alongside more professional pieces, and holiday decorations blended American traditions with colorful Guatemalan textiles. The living room already held several guests engaged in animated conversation. Mateo recognized Howard Greeley and his wife, along with 2 town council members he'd met at the festival. Robert appeared from what must have been the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Mateo, glad you found us. Here, let me introduce you to everyone properly." The next minutes passed in a blur of names and handshakes. Mateo offered the wine with an apologetic murmur about his limited knowledge of American varieties. Elena accepted it with genuine appreciation, as if he'd presented a rare vintage instead of the most affordable bottle he could find. "And what's this?" she asked, noticing the small package still clutched in his hand. "Small gift," Mateo explained, suddenly uncertain. "In Ecuador, we always bring something for the home when invited to dinner. If it is not appropriate, it's perfectly appropriate and very thoughtful," Elena assured him, accepting the package. "Should I open it now?" At Mateo's nod, she carefully unwrapped the gift. A small, hand-carved wooden figure of a bird in flight, its wings outstretched in an eternal moment of liberation. Elena turned it in her hands, admiring the detailed craftsmanship. "This is beautiful," she breathed. "Did you make this?" Mateo nodded, embarrassed by the attention his gift was drawing from nearby guests. Carving his hobby, From wood scraps at construction site where I worked first months here. You're an architect and an artist, Robert observed, studying the carving over his wife's shoulder. The detail is extraordinary. In my country, condor represents freedom, strength, Mateo explained. It is national bird. Then it deserves a place of honor, Elena declared, setting the carving on the mantel above the fireplace. Thank you for bringing a piece of Ecuador into our home. Dinner was served at a long table in the dining room, where Elena had indeed prepared an eclectic mix of dishes, traditional American holiday fare, alongside Guatemalan specialties. The conversation flowed more easily than Mateo had feared. His limited English less of a barrier in this informal setting, where people seemed genuinely interested in his perspectives. How is the community center design progressing? Asked Councilwoman Porter, directing her question to both Mateo and Howard. Howard gestured to Mateo with his fork. Why don't you share your latest innovation? The courtyard concept that solved our space problem. Put on the spot, Mateo hesitated, then found himself explaining his adaptation of the traditional Spanish colonial courtyard to serve as both a practical solution to the site's challenging dimensions and a symbolic center for the building's diverse functions. In Latin architecture, outdoor space is as important as indoor, he explained, unconsciously using his hands to shape the concept in the air above his plate. Not separate from building, but part of it. In Millwood, winter is challenge, but with right design, glass enclosure, we create space that feels open all year, but is protected. It's brilliant, Howard admitted. Solves multiple problems at once and creates a gathering space that's unique to our center. The conversation shifted to other aspects of the project. Budgeting challenges, construction timelines, community input, with Mateo's contributions increasingly solicited and valued. It was, he realized with a start, the first time since arriving in America that he had participated in a professional discussion as an equal rather than as a supplicant. After dinner, as guests migrated back to the living room for coffee and dessert, Mateo found himself beside a window overlooking the Kensington's backyard, momentarily apart from the ongoing conversations. The snow continued to fall, transforming the garden into an unmarked canvas of possibilities. Penny for your thoughts, came Robert's voice as the mayor joined him at the window. Though I'm not sure what the exchange rate is to Ecuadorian currency, Mateo smiled at the gentle humor. I was thinking about snow. We do not have it in Quito. First time I saw it here, I thought it was like magic. Robert nodded. Elena felt the same way her first winter here. By February, the magic usually wears off. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the steady descent of snowflakes illuminated by the porch light. Your home is very beautiful, Mateo said finally. Thank you for invitation. Thank you for coming. Robert turned slightly to face him. How are you settling in? Really? Not just the professional aspects, but life in Millwood? The directness of the question caught Mateo off guard. His instinct was to offer reassurances, to express only gratitude for the opportunities he'd been given. But something in Robert's sincere attention invited honesty instead. Work is good, very good, but he hesitated, searching for words that wouldn't seem ungrateful. Life is still solitary. I build buildings in my mind all day, but my own life here is still like foundation only. No walls yet, no roof. Robert's expression softened with understanding. Community takes time to build, especially across cultural differences. But it does build, one connection at a time. He gestured toward the dining room, where Elena was laughing with their guests. Did you know that when Elena first came to Millwood, she cried every Sunday for a year? She missed her family's traditional gatherings so much it was physical pain. How did she stop crying? Mateo asked quietly. She didn't entirely, but she started building new traditions alongside the memories of the old ones. Robert smiled reflectively, and she found people who were willing to learn about her culture while she learned about theirs. Not to replace what she'd left behind, but to create something new that honored both worlds. The mayor turned his gaze back to the snowy scene outside. Millwood hasn't always been good at welcoming newcomers, especially those from different backgrounds. It's something I've tried to change during my time as mayor, with mixed success. He paused. The community center project is part of that effort, creating a physical space that embodies the kind of community we aspire to be. Mateo nodded, understanding the weight behind the words. In architecture, we say building is only successful if it creates space where people feel they belong. Not just shelter, but belonging. Exactly, Robert agreed. And that's true for communities as well as buildings. He hesitated, then added with quiet sincerity, I want you to know that your place here doesn't depend solely on this project. Whether the consultancy becomes permanent or leads to other opportunities, you've already contributed something valuable to Millwood. You belong here if you choose to stay. The simple affirmation, "you belong here," resonated in Mateo's chest like the echo of a church bell. Not a guarantee of permanent employment or an easy path forward, but something perhaps more precious: recognition of his intrinsic worth beyond utility. Before he could formulate a response, Elena called them back to the group for dessert and coffee. The moment passed, but its impact lingered as Mateo rejoined the gathering, participating more freely in the conversation, his self-consciousness gradually receding in the warm atmosphere of inclusion. Later that night, walking back to his apartment through gently falling snow, Mateo replayed the evening in his mind. Not just the professional discussions or the delicious food, but the subtle shift he'd felt in his relationship to this place and these people. Not yet home, but no longer merely a temporary stopping place. His boots left tracks in the fresh snow, temporary marks of his passage that would be covered by morning. But beneath the surface, something more permanent was taking root, the first tentative foundations of belonging. Spring arrived in Millwood with theatrical enthusiasm, as if determined to make residents forget the harsh winter through sheer botanical exuberance. Overnight, it seemed, the town's parks and gardens erupted in color, daffodils standing at attention along walkways, cherry trees unfurling pink clouds of blossoms, magnolias spreading their cream-colored petals like outstretched hands. For Mateo, the seasonal transformation mirrored changes in his own life that sometimes seemed equally sudden and miraculous. The 6-month consulting contract had evolved into a permanent position with the town's planning department. His designs for the community center had moved from concept to construction documents, with ground broken in early April amid local media coverage and a ceremony where Mayor Kensington had specifically acknowledged his contributions. Most surprisingly, his social circle had expanded beyond professional connections. Frank Chen's daughter Lily, home from architecture school for spring break, had indeed been interested in his work, leading to mentor sessions that evolved into friendship. Anita Kaminsky not only collaborated on the center's lighting design, but also introduced Mateo to Millwood's small but active international professionals network. And then there was Sofia Rodriguez, the high school Spanish teacher he'd met while volunteering at a weekend language exchange program Elena had encouraged him to join. Their friendship had blossomed alongside the spring flowers, gradually deepening into something that made his heart race whenever her name appeared on his phone screen. On this particular Saturday morning, Mateo stood at the community center construction site, watching workers pour the concrete foundation for what would become the central courtyard, the heart of his design. Though not officially required to be present, he had developed the habit of visiting the site regularly, finding satisfaction in seeing his drawings transform into physical reality. "Looks like we're right on schedule," came Robert's voice as the mayor approached, carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed one to Mateo. "Cream, 1 sugar, right?" "Thank you." Mateo accepted the coffee with a smile, still touched by these small remembrances. Yes, foundation pour is going well. No surprises in the soil conditions. They stood side by side, watching the construction crew work with practiced efficiency. The community center site had once been an abandoned lot on the edge of downtown, a place most residents simply passed by without noticing. Now it buzzed with purposeful activity, the skeleton of Mateo's vision gradually taking form. "Hard to believe it's been almost 9 months since you shared your lunch with me," Robert remarked, sipping his coffee. "Sometimes the most significant turning points don't announce themselves as such." Mateo nodded, remembering that day in the park with clarity that hadn't diminished with time. "I didn't know you were mayor," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "I thought perhaps you were homeless, man." Robert laughed. "Not homeless, but definitely at a low point. Budget crisis, political opposition to the center, personal attacks in the local paper." He shook his head. "I was seriously questioning whether I was making any difference at all. And now?" Mateo gestured toward the bustling construction site. "Now I'm watching concrete evidence of progress. Quite literally." Robert smiled. "And I've been reminded why I wanted this job in the first place. To help build a community where different kinds of people can find common ground." He paused. "Speaking of which, the Jefferson Park Renovation Committee is looking for an architect with fresh ideas. Interested?" The casual offer, another expansion of professional opportunity, warmed Mateo almost as much as the spring sunshine. "I would be honored." They fell into companionable silence, watching as the wet concrete was spread and smooth. Matteo found himself thinking of his father, who had always said that the foundation was the most important part of any structure, invisible once the building was complete, but essential to its integrity and longevity. "Robert," he said suddenly, using the mayor's first name with still unfamiliar ease, "I never properly thanked you. For the coffee? It's just from the diner across the street." "No." Matteo shook his head, struggling to articulate the depth of his gratitude. "For seeing me? Not just my sandwich or my drawings." "May." Robert's expression softened with understanding. "Matteo, you'd be succeeding here with or without my small intervention. Your talent and work ethic would have found a way, perhaps, but you opened door when others would not even look through window." Matteo gestured toward the emerging community center. "In my country, we have saying, la mano que ayuda es la mano que recibe. The hand that helps is the hand that receives." "I like that." Robert nodded. "And it's true. Millwood has received much more from you than I gave that day in the park." He checked his watch. "Speaking of receiving, I believe you're having dinner with Elena and me tonight? Sophia's joining us too, right?" Matteo felt heat rise to his face at the mention of Sophia's name and Robert's knowing smile. "Yes, at 7 o'clock. Perfect. Now I should get back to the office. Saturday morning is my catch-up time before Elena drags me to her sister's birthday lunch." Robert clapped him on the shoulder as he turned to leave. "See you tonight." As the mayor walked away, Matteo returned his attention to the construction site, where the concrete pour was nearing completion. Soon this foundation would disappear beneath flooring, invisible but essential, much like the connections and opportunities that now supported his life in Millwood. He thought of the drawings waiting on his desk for the Jefferson Park project, of the language exchange program where he now helped other recent immigrants navigate their new lives, of Sophia and their plans to visit Ecuador together in the summer so she could meet his family. 9 months ago, he had sat alone on a park bench, rationing his meager lunch and calculating how many more weeks he could survive before admitting defeat. Now he stood on solid ground, both literally and figuratively, watching as his vision took physical form before his eyes. The spring breeze carried the scent of new growth and possibility, and somewhere nearby, a bird sang with uncomplicated joy. Matteo breathed deeply, filling his lungs with the promise of the season. There would still be challenges ahead, cultural adjustments still to navigate, moments of homesickness that struck without warning. But today, in this moment, he allowed himself to fully inhabit the truth that had been gradually revealing itself. He was building more than just a community center in Millwood. He was building a life, and it was turning out to be a beautiful design.